So today we will take a look at the Southeast Asia economy landscape. And for this, we have a very special lineup of speakers today joining us from Google Singapore office. I am happy to introduce one of my colleagues, Srikant, who is a strategy and insight manager. We are presenting to you today from Google Japan and Singapore office. We would like to welcome you to this latest edition of Google's Explore on Air webinar series. And each webinar, we provide insights onto a new market or industry in order to help our customers to enter a new market and be successful in those markets. So in this structure of today's presentation, we will first make an introduction of Google Temasek Economy Southeast Asia. I believe that our speaker Srikant will going to be give a little bit more specific context to explain about the Google Temasek research. And then we will take a look a general overview of Southeast Asia internet economy landscape. And then finally, we will take some questions. So please feel free to submit your questions through the YouTube interface. So without further ado, let me pass it over to our speaker, Srikant.
Thank you so much, Max. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to join all of you today for our Export on Air webinar. And over the next maybe 25 to 30 minutes, I'll talk to you about some of our biggest initiatives around understanding the internet economy of Southeast Asia, some of the biggest trends that we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, and what is the projection going forward in the next 7 to 10 years is what we're going to talk about. And this is what brings us to the e-Conomy SCA Southeast Asia Spotlight 2017, which talks about the unprecedented growth of the Southeast Asia internet economy. So let's get into a bit of context as we try to understand what is this Google Temasek economy report all about, what have we been doing in the last 2 to 3 years on this front, and where are we currently. So if you can just go to the next slide. So we started our understanding of the, yeah, Max, can we go to the next one? Yeah, perfect. So if we look at how the Google Temasek initiative has evolved, so we started this work in 2016 when we were trying to understand the overall landscape of Southeast Asian countries when it comes to internet adoption, when it comes to services that are being used as a result of their internet adoption, what are consumers doing in these parts of the world. And one thing which we realized very soon is that there is no one singular research which can credibly talk about the state of internet businesses in Southeast Asia or the state of internet economy in Southeast Asia. And that's when we partnered with Temasek, which is the biggest sovereign fund in the world, to come up with a very confident and timely estimate of the different industries that are driving the internet economy in Southeast Asia. And what we figured out are some very interesting trends way back in 2016 is that Southeast Asia was the fastest growing internet region in the world in 2016, adding more consumers at a rate that was unprecedented and unmatched in any other part of the world. And we sized the overall internet economy in Southeast Asia to grow to $200 billion by 2025. And one of the key things that we also figured out as part of realizing this huge potential in Southeast Asia was the investments that needed to come from venture capitalists and other investors around the world into Southeast Asia. And we concluded that we need a massive 40 to $50 billion of investments into companies that are into the internet space in the region. So with that context, we went on to study all the emerging verticals that power the internet economy in Southeast Asia. And we launched our latest report in Q4 of 2017, which was the e-Conomy Spotlight. Spotlight because it's specifically focused on deep diving into a couple of industry verticals which have seen a lot of momentum. And we'll just go in a second to which are the verticals or which are the industries we are talking about as part of the e-Conomy initiative. And we also studied who are some of the fastest growing players across the sectors which are part of the internet economy and what are some of the key consumer trends which are driving all of this. So as we go forward, whenever you talk about or when you hear about the Southeast Asia internet economy, it comes from six big countries that are part of this region. So keep in mind countries like Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Philippines. So these are the six countries that are the scope of the study that drive, I would say, bulk of the internet economy in the region. So if we can go to the next slide. So these are the four major industries that drive the internet economy in a very significant way. So these are the industries which have a very sizable consumer base, industries with very established monetization models, and industries which are actually driving a lot of user engagement and overall revenue growth as well. So these four industries are the ones that we have studied in detail as part of our Southeast Asia economy study with Temasek. And we'll go into the in-depth understanding of each of these verticals. So to add some more context in the next slide, yeah, Max, can we go to the next one? Yeah. So apart from the big sectors that I talked about, which is what you saw in terms of e-commerce, ride sharing, online media, and so on, there are also some of these emerging sectors that were not part of the study that we did in 2016 and also latest in 2017. But these are some of the industries we are seeing are gaining a lot of traction. There's a lot of user interest in finding and using more of these services. And we're keeping a very close eye on each of them. And as we move forward, we see a lot of scope for us to include these industry verticals where they have a sizable user base, there is significant engagement, then it becomes a part of our overall research with Temasek going forward. So you can see there are some services like financial services. I'm sure all of you have heard of the immense traction that payments are seeing in Southeast Asia. Like if you are in any of these countries, players like Grab are coming out with Grab Pay. We have products from more established players like Apple and Google with Apple Pay, Google Play, Android Play, and so on. So there are many players who are getting into the fintech ecosystem, and banks, of course, have their own payment versions as well. And it's something that we see internally in Google as getting a lot of search interest, which is what signifies the user intent to know more of and adopt more of these services. Entertainment is massive. We have a lot of locally grown players who are into online entertainment or online music. For example, we have Hook, we have iFlix, we have global players like Netflix trying to do a lot of initiatives and get more consumers in the region. So these are some of the industry verticals we're studying very closely, but currently not within the scope. But just count on us to make sure that we'll include these trends as and when they become significant enough. So let's go into the deep dive of the verticals that we talked about or the verticals that we have focused on in our study. So if we can go to the next slide, Max. So it all starts from the user base, right? And it is something which has grown so massively. It has accelerated like never before in Southeast Asia. We have more than 330 million internet users as of end of 2017 in Southeast Asia across the six countries I referred to. And just 2 years back, it was 260 million. So we have pretty much added more than 3 million users every month. So that's a massive scale, right? And if you talk about what these users are really doing, they're spending a lot of time using internet on their mobile phones because consumers usually come to internet first time using a mobile phone in this part of the world, and that's probably the only device they'll use for a very long time when it comes to using internet. So you can see that more than 90% of these users are accessing internet on a mobile phone only. And what is really astonishing is the engagement. Southeast Asia users spend 3.6 hours a day on their mobile phones accessing internet or using something to surf via the internet. And it is the highest region globally. It is more engagement than countries like China, more engagement than countries like the US, UK, and you name it, Southeast Asia beats all the regions and countries in the world when it comes to engagement on mobile internet. So this massive user base combined with some really high engagement is what is driving a lot of the internet enabled activity or internet driven activity in Southeast Asia. So with this in mind, we go to understand how these internet users and engagement levels are impacting across multiple verticals. So if we go to the next slide. So this is the overall summary of the industries that we have sized and what is the size of the industry as we have seen evolve from 2015 to 2017. So you can see we have looked and understood four industries in particular. One is ride hailing, which is what companies like Uber, Grab, and Gojek would be part of. Ride sharing, which is bike sharing or car sharing or You have a lot of different services offered by these players. And then you have online media. Online media is something that would include online gaming and online ads. Online travel, which is hotels, airlines, everything that is done online on the travel side of business. And then you have the e-commerce vertical, which is also gaining in a big way. So the key message here is that the internet economy size in Southeast Asia in 2017 has grown to become a $50 billion industry overall. And this is a very significant growth from where it was 2 years ago. We were just at $31 billion. And what we have seen is the last 2 years have actually significantly overpaced our 10-year projections. So you can see on the table for each industry vertical, we are growing way faster than the 10-year projections, which is something we expected since the industries are gaining a lot of traction in the early phases. But this has really beaten some of our estimates on how this would pace for the next 2 or 3 years. So there's massive acceleration across each of these industry verticals, and they're all beating our 10-year projections in a very significant way. So now let's go into each of these verticals and understand what's really happening in each one of them. What are the big trends or what are the key enablers that are driving this industry? So if you can go to the next slide, starting with e-commerce. So e-commerce is gaining a lot of traction, and you would have heard of brands like Shopee, Lazada, more local brands like Tokopedia. We have 11 Streets in Malaysia. Vietnam has Tiki and so on. So we have a very good mix of local players who are operating in certain countries. We have a very good mix of strong regional players like Lazada, Shopee. And all of this is driven in a very significant way by the consumer interest. So if you look to the chart on the left, the line chart, what it shows is the volume of Google searches made for e-commerce brands. And what we have seen is in just the last 2 years, the interest from consumers asking about or wanting to know more about these brands on Google platforms has grown by more than 2 times, which is a very big increase because this is a very significant base of users running into maybe 25 to 30 million users at least on a daily basis searching so much about this brand. So it talks a lot about the interest that has evolved and grown for these e-commerce brands which operate in the region. And it's not just the interest levels. This is also coupled with amazing levels of engagement. So if you look to the right, we have our top two brands which operate in the Southeast Asia region in e-commerce, compared with some of the top players in the US on the time spent in terms of the engagement, time spent on the e-commerce service over a month. And you see that the Southeast Asia players are a significant 140 minutes per month. And you compare that with the top player in the US, it's only 80 months. So we have almost twice the engagement levels of some of the more established markets like the US. And if you look at this 140 minutes per month, it's very significant because users don't spend that much amount of a time on any other e-commerce platform, any other part of the world. And this is also due to the fact that the Southeast Asia e-commerce players have included some social components to their services. For example, we have chat options in many of the e-commerce services, which is something very, very unique to the region because people are more comfortable using chat, talking to the sellers, or finding a place where they can meet and exchange goods and so on. So this is what we see as a major driver of the engagement levels and the user interest. And just to take a quick context into how we have sized the market, we have looked at all the first-hand goods that are sold online, and we have looked at a mix of B2C players and SMB2C players. So basically, any business, whether big or small, that sells to consumers directly over online. So that's the scope within which we have studied the market. So it includes all the big names on e-commerce industry that you can think of. And what this leads to is basically the potential or the overall size of the e-commerce market. So if you go to the next slide, we actually see that the e-commerce market in Southeast Asia has grown massively. Max, can we just look at the next one? Perfect. Thank you. So we see that the size of e-commerce market has almost doubled. It was at $5.5 billion. So this is the overall gross merchandise value that was generated from all the e-commerce players in the region, and that has almost doubled, growing at a very significant 40 So just to repeat, I think it was on mute for a while. To repeat, the e-commerce market size in Southeast Asia, it has grown massively from $5.5 billion to almost doubling to 10.9, and this has grown at a massive 41% growth in the last 2 years, and it's looking like it will be the case for a good 5 to 7 years going from now. So combined with a lot of user interest, a lot of engagement, and also support from the venture capitals across the world, this is really leading to a massive growth in the size of e-commerce industry. So let's look at some of the other industry verticals that we have in the region. So if we go to the next slide, the one we are referring to here is ride sharing, which is what I mentioned, includes players like Grab, Gojek, or we have Uber as well, which is a global player in Southeast Asia. We've we measure the momentum in the ride sharing industry by the number of rides they complete, right? And it can be rides done on cars, it can be rides done on bikes, and rides done, let's say, for services like food delivery. So we've seen some really amazing growth from 2015, because where it was only at 1.3 million rides a day, we have now gone on to have more than 6 million rides a day. So that's a really massive number for the number of rides that are being done by these players who operate across the region. And what's driving this in a big way is also the way some of these bigger players are expanding in the region. If you talk about Grab, they're already present in more than 150 cities in Southeast Asia. And if you think of the top cities in Southeast Asia, most of us would probably end up at 20, 25 cities. But imagine the level of penetration in tier 2 and tier 3 cities that players like Grab are getting at, which is already present in 150 cities. And a lot of these smaller tier 2, tier 3 cities have amazing penetration adoption level when it comes to locally relevant services like food delivery or bike services, right? So that's what is driving a lot of rights. And if you think about the other side, which is the number of driver partners who are on these platforms, who are actually probably getting a full-time job, or who are genuinely helping out people get from place A to place B in this region, they have grown also in a very big way. We have now 2.5 million driver partners across the Southeast Asia region working on a ride hailing service. So amazing growth in the number of rides, which is on the user side, equally balanced by the growth on the drivers who are supporting this entire ecosystem in a very big way. So if you understand what all of this is leading to in terms of market size, if you go to the next slide, you can see that the ride hailing industry has actually grown the fastest amongst all the other industry verticals that we studied. And this is testimony to some of the factors that we just talked about, which is huge growth across cities, penetration into tier 2, tier 3, consumers taking more rides than ever before, convenience, safety, and so on. The size of the market has more than doubled to be $5.1 billion from where it was just a couple of years ago. And if you think at if you take a look at the industries that we just discussed, so it's ride sharing or ride hailing and e-commerce. So these are the two key industry verticals which are driving bulk of the growth in the Southeast Asia region when it comes to the internet economy. And that's what makes them the spotlight of our 2017 report. So if you just maybe recap what we mentioned in the initial part of the discussion, the Spotlight 2017 was done on e-commerce and ride hailing, because these are the industries which have seen the highest growth in user engagement, highest growth in user adoption, how many users are actually on these platforms across countries, across locations, and so on. So this is something which has really pleasantly surprised a lot of our estimates, and we actually decided to have a spotlight on these two verticals while we continue to study some of our other emerging verticals like healthcare or online entertainment. So if you go to the next set of slides, we'll try to understand how some of the other parts of this Southeast Asia internet ecosystem are evolving. So understanding the internet economy landscape from a different view. So if we go one slide further, so let's take a look at what really drives a lot of the economy in Southeast Asia when it comes to internet-enabled businesses. So one of the key aspects that drives this is funding. And on the funding side, there has been some really good progress in the last 2 years. So if you remember our initial few slides, we talked about needing close to $40 to $50 billion in Southeast Asia region to be coming in as an investment into the internet first companies that would realize the potential of $200 billion for this internet economy size. And you see that the funding has massively grown. It's grown by close to 7 times just in the last 24 months. We were just over $1 billion in 2015. But since the time we've released the report, since the time we have tried to engage a lot of these stakeholders from around the world, we hope to believe that this has helped in certain ways to attract more interest into the region. Some of the biggest, I would say, private equity players or investment funds sitting out of the US or Europe, they're now looking at Southeast Asia as a big destination for investing in the next gen businesses where there is a massive potential, there is a massive base of internet users who are coming to these services in a big way. So a lot of investment happening in the last 24 months, very exciting times as we see this scale growing. But if we do a deep dive to understand where is this funding really going, what are the kind of players who are seeing this funding, if you go to the next slide. So this is a very interesting comparison where we look at the overall venture capital investments coming into a country and compare that with the GDP of the country. So we can see that the US is at the very top end of getting venture capital investments as percentage of GDP, and then followed by China. But if you look at the other countries and regions, actually Southeast Asia is at par with India. Like India is one of the fastest growing economies of the world in many ways, and it has seen a lot of investor interest in the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years. So Southeast Asia is now at par with India, which is a very encouraging sign, and we really hope that this continues to be on an upward trajectory to match some of the bigger venture capital markets. But this is very exciting and positive growth. And I think it has moved very significantly from where it was just 3 to 4 years ago. So companies around the world are taking notice. Investors are looking at Southeast Asia in a big way like never before. So this is a very positive sign when you look at some of these metrics like percentage of GDP that is venture capital. So let's look at where the funds have actually gone, like which kind of players have received funding or which stage of funding has most of this investment gone into. So if you go to the next slide. So yeah, this is, I think, one more good context into like what's really happening for some of the big players in the region, right? So we have this term called a unicorn. A unicorn is a company that is valued at more than 1 billion US dollars. And it's very exciting to see that we have a very big number of unicorns emerging out of Southeast Asia or emerging out of specific countries in Southeast Asia. So if you look at the top four, Grab, Lazada, Sea, which was formerly called as Garena, and then you have Razer, which is a amazing gaming company. You have these four players who are primarily based out of Singapore, headquartered here, but they operate across the region in Southeast Asia, those 6 countries that we were referring to. And these companies have been immensely successful at gaining more of the user base and addressing some of the local needs or unique needs of users. And you can see the homegrown regional champions have really made it into the unicorn list, which is $1 billion valuation or more companies. And then we also have some very exciting companies coming from Indonesia focused set of things. So we have Gojek, Tokopedia, and Traveloka, which are massive players coming from Indonesia, becoming unicorns over a period of time. And it's very much understandable that they come from Indonesia because in the whole Southeast Asia region, Indonesia has the highest number of internet users. It has the biggest size of burgeoning middle class users with a lot of focus on using mobile first solutions and some unique problems like massive traffic issues in Jakarta, which are solved by these players like Gojek and so on. So that is very encouraging to see country focused players becoming unicorns. And these players are actually now going regional. They're increasing their presence. For instance, Traveloka is actually now expanding in a big way to Philippines, Thailand, and Malaysia. So the country players are becoming regional. The regional players will continue to have a significant presence. So that's the view on some of the biggest players who have received a lot of funding and they have put it to a great use to solve local user needs, get a lot of users to use their services, and so on. So if you go to the next slide, this is a view into where all of this funding is predominantly going. So if you look at the unicorn list that we just referred to, it's these kind of unicorns which have received most of the funding in the last 18 to 24 months. Or if you think about some of the specific valuations around the non-unicorn companies, you can see companies valued between 100 million to 1 billion and companies below 100 million. These are the ones which have received significant investment compared to where they were before. But you can still see that the lion's share of investments go to unicorns because these are the companies which have already proven with their models that they are relevant to the region. Users want to get onto the services, and it's a very virtuous cycle which goes with some of these services. So very positive news on the overall funding received, and this stat specifically talks about like what we've seen in the last close to 9 to 12 months. So if we move forward to the stage of funding, so if you go to the next slide, so the startup scenario is understood also in the rounds of funding. So if you understand this, I'm sure all of you have heard this before, which is there is a seed funding that follows a series A funding, then you go to B, C, and so on. And then you also have a different kind of funding coming into the companies, which is debt funding or some of the other ways in which you get a private stake and private deal and so on. So you can see very clearly that nearly 1,400 deals were completed in the last 9 to 12 months. And it's very clear that the ability to raise funds in the initial parts of company or in the initial phases of a company, which is seed and series A, looks fairly easy. So the access to capital has really grown in a very strong way. So it's not very difficult as it used to be to raise funds in the initial stages. But you can see as you move forward, a lot of the companies fall off, and that's the reason you don't see a lot of deals happening in B or C. But again, on if you look at D, very small number, but as you can imagine, these are the companies which have proven their models, which have gone from the series A to B to C to D or more. So these are some of the big unicorns that would mostly make up the series D plus list when it comes to receiving funding. So a lot of deals happening across different stages. Getting access to capital at the initial stages looks fairly okay, but otherwise going forward, it seems tough. So that's the overview of funding. So if we go to the next slide, so we talked about funding as one of the key factors that would help realize the potential of the internet economy in Southeast Asia. So we talked about how we can look at a $200 billion plus size of the internet economy in Southeast Asia, these 6 countries across the industry verticals, some existing, some emerging, and as it evolves, I'm sure we'll have some of the newer industries that are very nascent as of date. But apart from funding, there are also many other pillars that need to come together, that need to work really well to be able to realize the potential of Southeast Asia internet economy. And we have those 6 factors listed here. This is what we also highlighted when we came up with the first version of the report in 2016. So these 6 continue to be the key pillars that need to be unlocked or that need to be evolved in a certain way for us to see the potential really grow into fruition. So apart from funding, we can see there are some other factors, and talent is something that stands out because that is, I think, the area which needs the most amount of work or concerted effort from governments, from the players who are part of this economy landscape, from different other partners, training programs, and so on. So that's one thing I'll touch upon. But if you look at some of the other factors that have really come into the picture and they are seeing some very positive momentum, would be some of the trends we see on the payment side, internet infrastructure, logistics, and customer trust. So let me spend a couple of minutes to talk you through what are the key trends or key happenings in each of these pillars which tell us that this is going in the right direction in a very strong way. So payments is something we briefly touched upon during the earlier part of the discussion, but we analyzed the Google search interest for payments, or let's say these brands of payments like Grab Pay, Android Pay, Apple Pay, and so on. So we actually saw that the interest for payments in the last 24 months has grown by 160 times across these 6 countries. So we are not talking about a low base of users. Southeast Asia has 330 million internet users, and most of them are on Google search pretty much every day. And we have seen the interest for payment services or these payment brands grow by 160 times. That is really massive. And I don't think I've seen any other industry vertical get so much interest in such a short period of time. Coming to some of the other verticals like internet infrastructure, and you would have heard this, that the internet speeds powered by stronger infrastructure are really gaining a lot of momentum. So if you look at the average internet speed on a connection in a country like Philippines, it has grown massively from where it was just 2 to 3 years ago. We see close to 5 MB plus internet speeds in Thailand. Countries like Singapore and Malaysia obviously lead this, where the infrastructure was always pretty good to begin with, and they continue to be even more stronger. For example, we have a lot of interest from global players like Alibaba and Google. So at Google, we just opened our Google Cloud region in Singapore a few months back, which would basically make sure that a lot of the Google products and services get even better support and even faster way to address consumer needs. So that's a very big positive. And global players like Alibaba are also getting into improving the internet infrastructure in Southeast Asia region, because that's the perhaps one of the very fundamental access issues that need to be solved for the consumers, who can then go on to use a lot of the services and products that are driven by internet. Talking about the other verticals, logistics I think is a lot about last mile connectivity. It's about giving that amazing user experience to consumers who buy something online or services that need a logistic presence. So here we have some very strong interest from global players like Amazon. I'm sure you've heard of Amazon's entry into Singapore, where they've built up 100,000 square feet big space to manage all their logistics requirements, which is a massive warehouse, which we are told will not only cater to Singapore, but very soon cater to many parts of Southeast Asia, hubbed out of Singapore. So that's a big change. And we also have some of the other players like Ninja Van, which is a last mile connectivity player, expand into many countries in Southeast Asia. They have received a $30 million funding recently. So that's a very big positive move on many fronts. These are just two big examples that come to my mind, but we have a lot of use cases and trends that tell us that logistics is also moving in the right direction, which is a crucial factor to make sure that consumers get a great experience when they buy something online or anything that needs logistics kind of partnerships. And also one thing which is very exciting is governments are now very keen to partner with players. Like we have known of cases where players like Lazada have partnered with Sing Post, which is Singapore Post. And also in Malaysia, we have seen similar partnerships with government-enabled postal services, which are, I think, fairly established and the best way to go forward. So coming to the last vertical on customer trust. So this is, I think, a key component of internet economy realizing its potential, because if consumers trust the platforms, they'll come and spend time. If they spend more time, they'll engage better. And if they engage better, they'll eventually transact or purchase something. And all of this is driven in a very significant way by the trust they have in each of these services. To take a couple of examples, the spotlight industry verticals of ride hailing and e-commerce. On ride hailing, we have close to 30 million active users of these ride sharing services. So across Grab, Uber, and Gojek, the three top players in the region, we have a user base, active user base of 30 million. That is really massive. And think about these 30 million users transacting or getting to rides, getting something to be delivered at their footstep, and so on. So that's really massive trust placed by this very large base of consumers, and this is only growing exponentially going forward. And talking about some of the other industry vertical of e-commerce. So e-commerce, I think, is an even better example of customers placing trust to buy things online. So across all the e-commerce players in Southeast Asia, we have a base of 75 million internet users who are transacting on e-commerce platforms, who are buying something from these players. So it's not just downloading an app and spending some time browsing things or checking the prices to eventually buy somewhere else offline. No, they're actually buying online, and these are transacting consumers, a 75 million base of users who are buying e-commerce. So really massive levels of consumer trust as shown in this case, but you can see that this is still a part of the 330 million internet users. So there's a long headway to grow for all these companies. But what we have seen the last 2 to 3 years gives us a lot of confidence that there is consumer trust and it's only improving, going in the right direction. And that brings me to the very last vertical of talent. You can see it's kind of colored differently, because I think that is one area where there still needs to be a lot of work done. We really don't think that we are at a stage where the locally homegrown talent is totally catering to all the internet economy needs, and that's a big reason why we see a lot of export talent, or a lot of talent from outside of the region actually coming and being part of the internet economy here. A lot of the C levels across companies are still not 100% homegrown, and I think this really is an opportunity for governments to come together to have more training programs for the graduating students or the working class, which can be very much part of the internet economy by gaining some of the right skill sets. We have a lot of initiatives from the big tech companies in the region to enable more of this, to encourage more homegrown talent to be part of this. So that's one area which still needs a lot of work, but it's definitely moving in the right direction. We do have programs from government of Indonesia and government of Thailand, which are working on building these digital skills with their citizens, which would make sure that they are fully part of this massive trend that is coming up, driven by internet across industry verticals and changing a lot of industries also in a significant way. So talent is one area where we are still putting a lot of efforts, seeing a lot of efforts overall. But I think that's not as evolved as some of the other verticals that we just discussed about. So this continues to be a challenge, and we'll study this very closely to see what are the best things that could be replicated across, or some things that can be enabled going forward. But yeah, this is the overall picture of the key pillars that drive the internet economy and what we are seeing on each of these pillars. So that pretty much brings me to the end of our discussion on the state of internet economy in Southeast Asia. Key things to remember, if I can quickly recap, is massive momentum across industry verticals seen in these 6 countries. The size of internet economy in Southeast Asia is now $50 billion, which is the overall size of gross revenues, or GMV, captured across these industry verticals. And the two industry verticals that you need to take notice of as part of our latest spotlight is ride sharing and e-commerce, because these are the two industries which have seen massive growth in user interest, massive growth in adoption levels. The way consumers have come to these services on platforms is really unprecedented. So it gives us a lot of confidence, coupled with the fact that we are also seeing funding come into the region in a big way, which I think is a very key pillar to unlock this overall internet economy potential. So we are seeing the right levels of, sorry, yeah. So we're seeing the right levels of funding come into the region, very significantly increased from where it was just 2 years back. So all of these point in the right direction. We are seeing a lot of good traction across parameters which help the internet economy. So we are at $50 billion in 2017. We are very, very positive on the fact that we'll hit the 200 billion potential that we are referring to by 2025, or even more. So we are studying all the existing verticals and the upcoming verticals of fintech or online education, online health, all of these upcoming industries in a very close way. We'll continue to come up to you with research pretty much, I think, once every year in our partnership with Temasek, and we'll continue to understand the economy of Southeast Asia driven by internet in a significant way and do our best to realize this potential. So yeah, Max, I think that's pretty much the overall view on the Southeast Asia internet economy. So if we can maybe take some questions or like anything that's on your mind.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And then, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. So thank you very much, Srinkan, for such an insightful presentation. It's great to see the spike in overall ride-hailing, online media, online travel, and the e-commerce industry. So I think the one of the interesting part is Google search for e-commerce brands are actually growing to X in just 2 years. So massive users engagement on e-commerce marketplaces, which you have seen in the slide, which is almost double the similar platforms in the US. Also, it's great to know that these amazing growth of internet user base is a key driver in the sizable growth of Southeast Asia internet economy. And not to mention, funding is also a key driver of the accelerated growth of Southeast Asia internet economy over the past 2 years. So which is pretty amazing that the total investment in Southeast Asia internet economy in 2017 was actually 7.7 billion US dollar, which is about 7x comparing to 2015, which is amazing. And also given that Southeast Asia has very high potential to grow, it actually causes the VC investments in Southeast Asia became very active. We can see that the venture capital investment in Southeast Asia are actually closing the gap with India and narrow it with China, which is very fascinating. So that's a little bit of my summary. So while we are waiting for anyone who wants to post some live question. Okay, I see that we have one question already. Uh, Jeff, Jeffrey. So Jeffrey is okay. So Jeffrey want to ask that is the payment industry search volume grow because of the cryptocurrency booming recently?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, yeah, sorry. Yeah, Max, can I answer now? Max, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the cryptocurrency is a very interesting trend that we have seen, right? And I think it has picked a lot only in the last 6 to 9 months in terms of the interest and the number of consumers who are actually getting to buy or trade on these cryptocurrencies. But the analysis that we have done doesn't include the cryptocurrency. So it's mostly to do with payment services only. So it includes only, let's say, peer-to-peer payments or peer-to-merchant payments or people wanting to transact with something that is more commonplace in nature. So it's driven by the interest on those kind of activities primarily. So the 160x is not driven, or at least the analysis we have done is not driven by cryptocurrency. So it's a separate thing. And I'm sure the cryptocurrency has also seen like massive growth in terms of how many users are looking for it, trying to understand what this really means. Can we get onto this trend? But yeah, the 160x is excluding the cryptocurrency trends.
Okay, cool. Thank you. We don't have any question yet. Let's wait for a couple of minutes and see if there's any questions. So I just want to remind you, please feel free to submit your questions by using the chat box on the right-hand side of the YouTube interface. If you do have any further question for us after this session, you can always write to us at exportonair@google.com. exportonair@google.com. So otherwise, we'll be posting this the recording of this session in high definition in the Export on Air website. So I would like to remind you again that you could also look at all the past 10 webinars that we've held since launching this webinar series in September 2016. And of course, if you've attended this webinar and you register through the website, you're also in our mailing list. And we'll make sure to let you know about any future sessions by sending you follow-up emails with the link to the site and the recording as well. So, okay, now we have another question from ZZLLRR. Okay, so the question is, any details on user device preference, PC or mobile in different country of SEA, Southeast Asia when searching on Google? So, Srikanth, do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very relevant question. And the key thing to note here is that the significance of mobile phones or significance of mobile internet in Southeast Asia cannot be overstated. And the reason for that is you could see trends like people spending more than 90% of their overall time on just mobile internet when they're talking about internet, right? And the reason for that is a lot of users who access internet in Southeast Asia access it for the first time on a mobile device. And that's probably the only device they will ever access internet on. So if you look at how the trends have evolved in internet, or if you call it the World Wide Web, right? So there was a phase one which started with a desktop heavy way of accessing the internet. If you look at some of the first countries that went heavy on using internet was the likes of US and Western European countries. And it's all started with desktop. People would access internet on their computers, which were, let's say, at homes or office. But as the evolution of the World Wide Web happened to more developing countries or countries in Asia, it happened on mobile. And even more so going forward in today's age, what we are seeing is mobile is becoming the device to access. It's almost like a supercomputer or a mini supercomputer that sits in your pocket. You see the processing speeds have increased exponentially. over the last few years, which are powering mobile devices to pretty much do what a computer could do in, let's say, 10 or 12 years back in the day. So the prominence of mobile phone is huge. Like it can not be overstated, and especially for a region like Southeast Asia, the medium of access is mobile phone and probably only mobile phone. So if you look at some of the trends we see on our platforms, we see more than three-fourths of our overall watch time on YouTube come from mobile phones. We see Google search where we see more query interest on a mobile phone than a desktop for a while now already. So we are seeing the trend very heavy on mobile phones across services. You talk about ride sharing, it's a mobile service only kind of a service. If you talk about e-commerce, people are transacting or purchasing more than 70% of their overall value on mobile phones. If you look at online entertainment, people are streaming video on mobile phones more than any other platform. And this is also enabled by a lot of our initiatives, like helping users find seamless experiences on mobile phones. So companies are actually now thinking of mobile phones first when they're developing, let's say, a web presence, or when they're developing an online presence, before thinking of a desktop or a traditional presence in that sense, right? So mobile phones is huge across platforms. We see consumers significantly spending time transacting, engaging on mobile phones, and even more so in Southeast Asia because it's a mobile first region in many ways. More than 90% of the internet users are on mobile phones to begin with. So yeah, if that answers your questions, mobile is the internet in Southeast Asia.
Okay, thank you, Srikan, and also thank you for the lovely questions. And I think that's all we have time today. And I don't think we have another any other question. So so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach us at exportonair@google.com, and we'll try to answer your question as soon as possible. Also, we will send you a feedback survey because we would love to hear your thoughts of the presentation today. And finally, I would like to thanks again to our speaker, Srikan, for your time and taking us through these very interesting insights. And thank you all for joining the session, and see you next time.
My pleasure, Max. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining. It's really appreciated that you've taken some time to learn more about the internet economy. So thank you all for your time. See you
Thank
soon.
you.